Good morning friends and welcome to the EduSite Network. Our topic of discussion today is a continuation from tomorrow. That is, it is the second part of our lecture titled Education in Indian Culture, and today we are going to discuss what constituted education, its content, the role of the state in this particular idea and its pertinence to the economy and society as a whole. And for this discussion, we have with us in our studio Dr. Shankar Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Hindu College, University of Delhi. He has also served as a member task force on enabling the young redefining education, University of Delhi in 2012, and he is also the appointed member of the Empowered Committee on Indian History and Culture to devise the syllabus at the University of Delhi. So with this introduction, I'd like to welcome Sir. Thank you so much, sir, for coming, and I request you to resume our today's lecture.
Thank you, Urvashi. Good morning, viewers. We have been talking of the scenario of education in India. Not only the backdrop is essentially historical, essentially the past of Indian history, and we have in the earlier discussion we have taken care of as to what constituted education, the variants that we encounter, the organization, the techniques deployed, the content part, particularly with reference to ancient India, where we began from the earliest times, excluding the Harappan scenario, not with some kind of a design, but essentially because we don't have access to the literary sources of Harappan times, and also because whatever sources that we have in literary terms has not been deciphered, and the quantum of literary sources are also very low. So essentially we began from the early Vedic times, which is Rig Vedic times, and took it on up to the Gupta, post-Gupta period. That's where we had stopped yesterday. And quite a few things which are of contemporary pertinence, we did note that quite a few ideas, quite a few perspectives, quite a few deficiencies, quite a few high points can be located in ancient Indian past, so far as education is concerned, because this is something which impacted society at the ideational level, and since ours is one of the oldest civilizations the world over, and there is continuity of social life, social and political life ever since the Vedic times. Therefore, there are very significant lingerings of past, at times even at the subterranean level, at the subconscious level, which despite several dynastic, political changes and even technological changes have somehow managed to continue and inform the present generations as well, not only in terms of the content of education, but also the organizational part of transacting it. So the Guru Shishya Parampara, Gurukul as an organization, etc., are something which are spoken of even in the contemporary times, although there is a surge of Western educational system, particularly with reference to the colonial past that we had for around 200 years. All these things need to be understood in this context, that there is always this kind of a give and take, and also contestations present almost perennially in Indian history. This is in addition to the to the altogether a different kind of cultural experience that India had with the coming of the Turkish rulers and subsequently the Mughals, who were socialized with the idea of Islamic tradition of education and learning, and they gave a different flavor to what constitutes education, the way its content got redefined, the way organization of transacting education in India's past got redefined or at least modified, or in some sense we can say some alternate structure and models were proposed, and they continue to the present times as well. And the Western surge, the modernization, industrialization, English education, etc., which came post the Mughal period, have also interacted with the parallel traditions of learning organizations and also the content, and there has been some kind of a give and take also witnessed through and that can be witnessed in several fascinating studies. I shall try to also incorporate in today's lecture one such case study with reference to Indian medicine, ancient Indian medicine, that is Ayurveda, the way it tried to reinvent itself in the face of the Western challenge, and the resource persons, the practitioners, the teachers of these craft, of these knowledge systems, they also underwent some kind of an image makeover as a result of these pressures. So when we adopt historical perspective to understand Indian culture, what essentially we are doing is to locate some kind of the historical substratum on which the major fault lines or even major trajectories of what constitutes education in India today can be located. So this is the intent and purpose of having a historical perspective in order to understand and discuss the issue of education in India from the point of view of culture, that is its permeation into the society as a whole, the way we visualize about education, the way we think of education, the usage to which education is put in the present times, and what was its purpose and intent in the ancient and medieval past. That is also something that we should be looking at. Now, having talked about this, the overall intent and structure of our lecture, let's now get on to the business of the content part of it. And what we discussed yesterday essentially can be summed up in a way like in the Vedic times, the learning was organized in a way which can be described as Gurukul Parampara, where people from different classes, people from different varnas could go to a particular place where a teacher in association with several other senior pupils transacted the business of teaching, learning. It at times were residential, and it also had people coming on day-to-day basis. In some sources, we did say that it seems that some Varnas, particularly the Shudras, perhaps did not have access to Vedic corpus of learning, and there is a sense of religiosity associated with it, and since it is all ensconced in a religious kind of package, therefore there are other connotations of that as well. But fact of the matter is that the entire focus, and that we discussed yesterday, is to equip a student to become a good household person, a good grihast, which is the second stage of the four ashrams into which human life span is divided conventionally in Brahmanical sources, that is brahmacharya, grihastha ashram, then we have vaniprasth, and then we have sannyas. So in order to become a good grihast, one needed to have quite a few skills, quite a few set of awareness, life skills, and they were all sought to be given through these institutions. Therefore, we did discuss it yesterday that as per the fourfold Varna division, some sources do inform us that a Brahmin student got to receive more training in the scriptures, its pronunciation, its grammar, and the way it has to be recited. So that part is emphasized with reference to the needs and demands of a particular set of people who are supposed to be earning their livelihood from this, who are supposed to be well versed in that craft or skill or knowledge. Similarly, a Kshatriya is expected to have more training in warfare, in diplomacy, in Niti Shastra, and so forth. So the legal aspects, the dharma, etc. So all these things are especially administered to the set of people who are likely to be making use of it in their life subsequently in the grihastha stage. And therefore, and also we did talk of some application-based learning, like it could be medicine, it could be agriculture, or for that matter, several other aspects of learning, with which cattle rearing, pashupalan, so forth, with which a Vaishya is more likely to engage in trade and commerce, commercial transactions, and so forth. And they are also provided for in these institutions, and it is here that we need to take care of this. Probably yesterday, on account of paucity of time, we did not elaborate on this. But there are parallel institutions, other institutions, who are specifically giving such kind of occupational or vocational trainings, and they in ancient India, say from the middle of the first millennium BC, are referred to in the texts as shrenis, which are actually merchant guilds or artisan guilds or traders guilds. And what they do, they did have some element of hereditary aspect associated with it. They also had a tinge of monopolistic control. Say a traders guild or an artisans guild or a guild of merchants would ensure that the prices of the goods that they manufacture and sell in the market are not disturbed, are not violated either by the state or by individuals, and therefore there is fair degree of intervention of these institutions in the realm of economy. apart from the professional training, probably on hereditary basis, that they were imparting to the apprentice who were under them. So, say a pupil who wants to pursue his life by, say, doing wood work or metal work or other trade related or artisan related activities, they were trained by the set of people who were there in that shreni, in that guild, and simultaneously these guilds also exercised some kind of monopolistic control, or at least sought to exercise monopolistic control over the trade, over the activity, over the occupation that they were into. They are also known to be in touch with the king in order to ensure that this tradition continues and there is not much of interference in this exercise. And we have several such references in ancient Indian sources from 6th century BC onwards. Even Chanakya talks about it, particularly with reference to the taxes that the state has to extract from these bodies, from these occupations and so forth. And therefore, this is yet another institution. Usually we lose sight of these bodies when we try to look at only the theory part of knowledge transaction and tend to limit our discussion to the gurukuls and so forth. Subsequently, in the South Indian scenario particularly, we find several gurukuls devoted to specific skills, say of sculpturing or of metallurgical operations and so forth. And these are the things that need to be understood, particularly with reference to the often spoken of gap that exists in Indian education system between the Shastric parampara, the theory aspect of knowledge, the scriptural aspect of knowledge, the theological aspect of knowledge, and the application of these wisdom. That is the technological aspect, the hands-on aspect of knowledge. And probably it is believed that since some sections of society did not have access to theological learning and other theoretical aspects, therefore the two could not come together, and that is something that probably plagued Indian education system. But as we are seeing that it is not entirely true that the two were always dissociated, because there are institutions where the two are coming together and coming together rather fruitfully. Now, we will see in today's discussion that apart from the formal claims through these institutions of knowledge building and transactions and dissemination, there are other attainments in the realm of technology, say navigation and so forth, and that also calls for some renewed focus so far as inquiry into the formal institutions or even informal institutions which prepared people or which served as some kind of the center or nodal agency where such knowledge were either honed or disseminated or even created. So it is this aspect that will come in for specific inquiry and focus in today's discussion. Now, in the post-Gupta period, we find that, of course, quite a few lingerings of the ancient Indian educational system do continue. But talking from the economy point of view, we find that there is definitely more and more output. So far as agriculture is concerned, there are texts which do tell us about the seasons, about the agricultural operations, about the technologies involved with reference to irrigation. The agrarian calendar is the agricultural cycle is vividly described, not only in these specific texts and treatises, but also in several copper plate land grant charters. And this is mostly coming from down south, Deccan and down south, where agriculture is registering its intensive presence probably for the first time in history, and new states are coming up as a result of the surplus generated. So the Brahmaday grants, the Agraharas, which dot the map of Deccan and South India in the post-Gupta period, are also probably the centers from where agriculture-related knowledge, information is not only created but also disseminated and is actually put into practice. So the way in which the forest land was cleared, or the barren land also were cleared and prepared and made fit for agriculture in North India, particularly in the Gangetic plains, similar kind of scenario is witnessed in the post-Gupta period in the Deccan and down south. This is not to say that agriculture was not known to the people who were living in this area before these grants were made, but definitely the intensification of agriculture is something that we get to see from around this time. And the solar and lunar calendar with which the people were aware of right from the beginning, they are transmitted down south, and it takes a different kind of shape altogether. Also with reference to the temple management, and also with reference to regulation over irrigation water, tank irrigation and so forth. And we have numerous inscriptions to this effect, which testify to the fact how in South India agriculture and temple economy became the linchpin and became the keystone of governance itself, and it impacted the society as a whole in ways more than one. Now, having talked about agriculture, let's also spare a little bit of time for the sculpturing traditions that developed not only in the post-Gupta period, but right from the post-Mauryan period itself, in the Mauryan period also. We find wonderful specimen of sculptured items. Of course, the themes were taken from the Indian tradition and history and mythological past of India. And for instance, Jataka stories, the stories related to Buddha's birth, or for that matter, the Puranic stories related to Brahmanism, Hinduism, and so forth, they are depicted through wonderful sculpturing, which definitely had a fair degree of impact in terms of stylized depictions from, say, Persian and also Greek traditions. And we know for sure that the Mauryans and even thereafter, the postmodern period, we had very thriving commercial economic relation with the Western world, particularly with the Roman world. And maybe that through these transactions, impulses or impact of the traditions, sculpturing tradition beyond the boundaries of India were also getting in and getting disseminated in Indian craft traditions. So we have the Mathura school of sculpturing and art, and we have Gandhar school of sculpturing and art, and most of the idols, most of the sculptures that we get to see across religion, it could be Buddhist, it could be Jain, or it could be Brahmanical Hindu gods and goddesses, Puranic gods and goddesses. They are sculptured in ways which seem to be not entirely uninformed about the Greek tradition of sculpturing also. For instance, we all do know that Buddha was born in Nepal. And we all know as to what is the general appearance of a Nepalese. But if you look at the sculpture of Buddha, right from history down to the present times, there is a particular way, there is a particular form in which Buddha gets depicted, and the sharp nose, the wide eyes, and the dress part of it, the cloth across his torso appear to be transparent. They are made in stone, yet they appear to be transparent. So the muscular depictions of hands get reflected despite the presence of cloth over it. And these are typically the Greek tradition of sculpturing, which perhaps the Indian sculptures or the people involved in Mathura and Gandhar school of sculpturing were also aware of, and therefore it is coming together of these traditions. Similarly, there are magnificent temples built not only in South India in a particular style, Dravid style, but the northern part of India throws a different kind of temple architecture, that is Nagar style and so forth, and there are regional variants, and all these call for some kind of a basic and very even nuanced understanding of geometry and mathematics, the symmetry aspect, the load sharing aspect, the durability aspect, and so forth, aesthetics apart. So these are the things which we need to understand, that over a period of time it did involve. So one can't say that theory was completely dissociated with the actual application, because unless the two could come together, you could not have such a wonderful specimen from such a remote past. So of course the usual presentation of what is actually transacted in these institutions like Gurukuls and so forth follows a particular pattern of literary tradition. That does not mean that other aspects of hands-on knowledge or application part of knowledge were not transacted altogether. And we have also seen the parallel institutions where like the Shrenis and so forth, the guilds, where the application-based knowledge and the application-based training could well have been transacted, and since the literary tradition, which becomes the source through which we get to understand all these, are themselves straight-jacketed in a particular style, so they themselves are stylized. Therefore, we somehow at times casually tend to say that the two were not coming together, and there was some kind of a chasm between the theory part and the application part of it. So that is one issue that I wanted to emphasize so far as ancient India and education system are concerned. Now, having spoken about these aspects, I'll take up the medicine aspect, the knowledge within the domain of healing and therapy in a different context. Therefore, we are skipping that topic at this moment. It is in a different context that we shall pick it up for discussion. Now, with the arrival of the Turkish rulers, say from 13th century onwards, with their continued presence, of course, Islamic impact or presence is registered in the Indian subcontinent much earlier, some in Sindh and some in the peninsular India. But what I'm referring to here is the continued institutionalized presence of the Turkish rulers from 1206 onwards in the form of Delhi Sultanate. And from here on, since they had come from a different culture and they were socialized with a different kind of religion and also knowledge system, the skills, the architectural styles are distinct, which over a period of time does register their presence in India, and there is fair degree of syncretization also. This is most vividly described, or one can actually see the two traditions of architecture, the Islamic architecture and the Hindu architecture, coming together in one architectural specimen. You go to Firoz Shah Kotla in Delhi, and you will find that it has a couple of floors, and one floor is following the beam and trabeate style of architecture, which is like straight beam standing over two pillars, and that is how load is shared so far as the building architecture is concerned. And the other floor, the next floor, is having typical Islamic architectural principles deployed, which is arch and dome. So you have arches instead of flat beams over the pillars, and the load sharing itself is not entirely on the pillars, but it is the keystone and other architectural principles where the load is shared thereby within the arches. And the dome itself, the most perfect example is that of Taj Mahal, but the earlier specimen can also be had, say Humayun's tomb, which is not a perfect dome, but it is not bulbous. So it is a structure which is like hemispherical kind of a thing, and by the time we reach Shah Jahan's period, probably as a result of more sophistication in architectural knowledge and tradition, and also the Mughals were so socialized with the urban traditions of, say, Samarkand and Central Asian regions. Therefore, they are also inviting several painters and several learned people from Arabic, Persian and Central Asian region into India, and thereby a different kind of coming together of knowledge traditions is happening here. and we have coming together of these traditions. This is exemplified also in sartorial variety that we have in dress and also in the construction of ghats and steps and so forth. The Baulis, the water bodies, which we had a long historical tradition right from the ancient times of water preservation, right from the Harappan times, Dholavira. They all had very sophisticated system of water management, and all these things are getting further modified and becoming more and more sophisticated. There is aesthetics, element of aesthetics getting added to it, and it is not only the functionality which is important in construction of these baulis, and most of the brilliant specimen can be seen even in the present times in Rajasthan area and so forth. Now, this is about the application part of it, so far as the Turkish Turkish and Mughal rules are concerned, the Sultanate and Mughal rules are concerned. But in terms of theological aspect or the theory part, the elementary knowledge or secondary knowledge that we have been talking of in ancient situation also. So in the medieval times also, the indigenous forms and organizations did continue, and they were also supplanted, they were also supplemented with the simultaneous presence of new institutions, like in the elementary stage it is maktab, and in the secondary education sector it is madrasas. Even Sufi khankas are also performing this function of knowledge dissemination, where different spiritual and theological traditions are being transacted with people of different pursuits, and not necessarily Islam. So even Hindus are going there, and the bhakti tradition, which was very much present by the time these Turkish rulers established their rule in the form of Delhi Sultanate. This tradition comes together with the Sufi tradition, and syncretization is something that we get to see, which is perennially present all through the Sultanate and Mughal period. Even today, Sufi tradition is something which cuts into the theological compartmentalization of people and knowledge, and it rather picks up elements which brings together people and creates a different kind of knowledge and information reality by itself. And it had a lot of adherents, and the popularity of Sufi Sufi saints and shrines and khankas are well known to us. We all are aware of Ajmer Sharif, Nizamuddin Dargah, and so forth. So apart from this, in the realm of literature and poetry, the coming of Urdu with the infusion of Persian element and so forth, they are also to be taken care of while talking about this. Now, having spoken of the theoretical as well as the application part of it, like sculpturing, and also I think we didn't quite talk about metallurgy, which was another sector in which ancient Indians were having fair degree of competence. The steel making and the rust-free technology for making steel is something which seems to be some kind of specialization, and therefore the weaponry, the range of weapons also, particularly with the Rajput rulers, they are exemplary, and they are of good quality iron or steel, so to say. These are some of the application-based knowledge system with which we as ancient Indians were quite socialized with, and there must have been specific institutional arrangement for the dissemination of this, either in formal or informal sector. It could be families also, it could be shredis, as we talked about also. Having spoken about this, and since the next stage that we would be getting into is the coming of the British, industrialization, the colonial times. Therefore, let's for next 2-3 minutes talk about Indian medicine that we had spoken of. Now, the Ayurveda, the way it is exemplified in the classical treatises of Charak and Shushrut, and subsequently also Vagabhat also, although Vagabhat does acknowledge that he is essentially working on the Charak Samhita and Shushrut Samhita, and is trying to present it in a more popular way, in a more systematized way. Limiting our discussion to what Charak Samhita or Shushrut Samhita had to say about Indian medicine, we find that there is fair degree of application of the empirical knowledge. There is this wonderful work by Kenneth Zaysk where he talks of the ascetic traditions of the Buddhists, and also the asceticism with which the entire religious scenario of the middle of the first millennium BC is characterized in history, be it Brahmanism, Jainism, Buddhism included. And this ascetic tradition led to some kind of craft of healing themselves, or making use of medicinal herbs and several other practices which over a period of time got institutionalized in the monasteries in which the Buddhist monks used to stay, particularly during the rainy season. The pharmacopoeia, the rich range of the pharmacopoeia is documented. And the principle of kapha, vayu, pitta, the tridosh, etc. are somewhat anticipated. So even the episteme of Ayurveda is something which seems to be, the rudiments of that seems to be present in the ascetic traditions of around this period. And what we find in Charak Samhita and Shushrut Samhita is essentially a compilation of all these traditions. Of course, there is a substratum of earlier healing practice also, and if you read Charak Samhita and Shushrut Samhita, at times you get this impression that there are several other traditions also simultaneously present, and the authors do acknowledge it, that of the several traditions this is what is prescribed, although there are several other ways of healing also. And that again tells us that apart from the institutions like Gurukuls and several others that we spoke of, in the sense like the Shrenis and so forth, the trade guilds, artisanal guilds, etc. We also have these monasteries working as some kind of centers where such learnings could be had, where it could such knowledge could be applied, and we do get to hear of higher education centers which can be equated with the term universities, like in Takshila, Nalanda, Vikramshila. There are several others. These are the iconic ones. And if you look at the curriculum of these centers, of course it is more advanced level at which these crafts and these skills and these occupation-based knowledge is transacted. We do get to hear of Jivak in ancient India, who was a master healer, master physician, and their association with these centers of learning, these iconic centers of learning, and the cosmopolitan character that these centers had, allowing perhaps the incoming of ideas from across time and space, from across political boundaries, from across religious pursuits or religious affiliations. And that tells us about a very thriving and very open kind of knowledge system so far as its creation and dissemination are concerned. Of course, there are India is a huge country with different psychologies coming together. There are contrasting opinions also. For instance, Al-Biruni, who came around the 11th century, 12th century period. He's around 11th century with Muhammad Ghazni. And here, while talking in his book Al-Hind, he does speak of the knowledge system of India. He does tell us about the wisdom that India has in laudatory terms. And at the same time, he also talks of the haughtiness of the Brahmins, who are supposed to be the repositories of ancient wisdom and theological understanding and so forth. And he laments this fact that that the Brahmins do not reveal everything that they know very easily. So it's the opaqueness of the Brahmins, despite having a lot of wisdom that is mentioned by Al-Biruni. And he at times, of course, is coming from, and he himself is an accomplished knowledgeable person, and he does say that it so seems that there is a heap of cow dung and there are pearls within, and one had to wade through quite a few of unwanted things in order to discover something really good and great in Indian knowledge system. So the point is that apart from these centers, there are several other claims which are not very genuine, and at times they got ornamented. And if you talk of the post-Gupta period, this is the times when feudal system is taking roots in India, and the openness, the transparency, the coming together of different traditions on account of the vast canvas, on account of mobility of people, that was somewhat hindered. And what we find, and this is reflected in the literature of the post-Gupta period also, which tended to become more ornate, and there are a lot of adjectives. Instead of the original new creation, it is the representation of the same epic stories or some other account, but in a different ornate way and so forth. So at times such tendencies somewhat cut into the actual dynamism with which the Indian knowledge tradition was flowing. And this is the place, this is the time when Al-Biruni comes to India, and therefore his statements are graphically capturing probably the scenario at around this time. Now, having spoken of this, let's now come towards the last part of our lecture. Let's focus on what is it that happened around the times when India started experiencing colonialism. Of course, the East India Company came much before, and they came as traders alongside several other European shipping European trading companies, and ultimately it is the English, the East India Company, the British East India Company, which triumphed over other European contemporaries like the French and the Dutch, and established its supremacy in India, and slowly also started getting into the political affairs, beginning from Bengal onwards. Here we find some kind of a shift subsequently in policy terms also, particularly with the erosion of the monopoly of East India Company from 1830s onwards itself, much before 1858, when it was formally a part of the British Empire. And this is best exemplified in what is very vividly spoken of with reference to the minutes of Macaulay and what Macaulay had to do to Indian education and so forth. But also important is the fact that in the informal sector, these are some of the things which need to be probed further. Particularly with reference to technology. When Vasco da Gama came to India, he's said to have taken the help of a local person. He could be an Indian or from Gujarat. There are claims and counterclaims. He could be an Arab also. And he does acknowledge that this person who actually aided him in navigating across the Arabian Sea to the western coast of India, actually had a device and had a better understanding of one's position in the deep sea. Now, please understand that in the middle of 18th century, Newton is said to have spoken this in the British Parliament, that till around that time the world did not have the precise ways and means or instrument through which latitudes can be gauged or latitudes can be determined, particularly with reference to one's position in the deep sea, where one cannot use the previous sighted land as the reference point, and therefore this was a big problem for all the navigators, including Europe. And here was a person who is having some kind of a device, and that device probably is a rapalgai. Rapalgai is a Malayalam word, and it means, etymologically if you say, it means something, a wooden device, and there are strings attached to it, and it is described in European sources that that string was put between the teeth of the person, and some kind of locational precision was calculated by sighting the pole star, and thereby the position in the deep sea could be determined. So these are the things which are happening in the informal segment of Indian life, having direct pertinence with everyday life, everyday transactions of life, and they need to be further looked at. Now, coming to the Macaulay issue, of course, by the time we are talking of the 1830s onwards, the interest of the British in ruling over India had changed. It was not merely to trade that they wanted to continue in India from here on, because Britain had undergone industrialization. By 1830s, Britain had fairly industrialized. And it started looking at India not only as a trading partner, but also as probably the supplier of raw materials for their industries, their big industries, and also probably as market for their industrially finished goods. And that's when things are changing, and Macaulay's articulations, where he seeks to convert Indian people into essentially English in taste, is to be understood with reference to creating market for the British finished goods. Because Indian handicraft, if you see around 18th, 19th century, particularly 18th century, they are thriving, and the British consumers are preferring Indian handicrafts, Indian textiles, as compared to the machine-made textiles from these mills post-industrialization. So there is fair bit of interplay of economic interest as well here in operation, and therefore there is this thrust on having a different kind of educational system. Also important is the fact, the triumph of the positivist ideology, the positivist intellectual current in Europe in 19th century, where natural sciences had come to awe the other forms of knowledge, the other disciplines like history, politics, religion, theology, and so forth, philosophy, and therefore all these disciplines are trying to devise some theory. So positivism itself says that the essential philosophy behind looking at things is to restrict the phenomena essentially to the phenomena itself. So the other correlates, the ecology of that phenomena or that existence is lost sight of, and so one becomes very precise and very confined in approaching a subject, and that is something which led to further subdivision of different aspects of learning, which was probably more coherent and holistic in the earlier times, and that is what with which we are continuing to the present times. Of course, in the recent times there has been this need which have been articulated that we need to have approaches which are more transdisciplinary and which somehow relate to the character building and wholesome outlook towards things. And Indian medicine itself, the Ayurveda itself, can lay its claim to the fact that its approach, quite in contrast to the allopathic formulations, is more holistic, it is more ecologically rooted. So all these things do exhibit differing properties, differing tendencies, and we believe that India today is at some kind of a crossroad where one has to take a call on redefining the educational scenario in the light of quite a few demands and also the traditions, the culture of education that we encountered in Indian history.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. So, friends, we had a look at, in fact, a number of interesting facts and ideas on education, and this was a second lecture on education in Indian culture. And with this, we take your leave because we need to wrap up immediately. But we shall be back with more very interesting lectures with sir. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you, friends, for watching. Have a great day.